Trekking to the cloud, wired, wireless, cellular enabled, and satellite. We're going to talk about getting to the cloud and back. To set the context, I want to read what the overview was that we put in the website for the show. As file sizes continue to grow and the number of end users increases, moving content through the internet enables this content to be available wherever and whenever it is needed. Cloud storage is promising, but there remain challenges as well as rewards for getting content transported to where it is needed quickly and securely. There are many opinions about the future of content transport and how it will evolve. This includes opinions on what will occur with extensive installation of fiber optics by telcos, cable cos, and Google. There's also considerable discussion of how sales of spectrum will impact the growth of access as society becomes increasingly mobile. This panel will take a look at the future, envisioning what content transport will look like down the road. So I'm going to ask each of the people on the panel to take, about 30 seconds or so to say who they are, where they work, and what their involvement is in this particular area. Starting with my immediate left, Michelle Munson, please.
Hello, I'm Michelle Madison. I'm CEO and founder of Aspera, now an IBM company, and we are deeply involved in this transport area by definition of our core technology and what we do. I think the interesting point from this panel is the data and the storage, of course, really drive it, and so much of it is in these object storage cloud environments, and probably most of my comments will be around that.
And to her left, Eric Marco from Bel Air Internet.
I'm Eric, Bel Air Internet. Bel Air Internet's an internet service provider here in Los Angeles, and I'm a special projects manager and an infrastructure engineer. So I engineer solutions to bring bandwidth to different parts of the city, fiber acquisition, building of dark fiber networks, and solutions to get people bandwidth inside of buildings via Wi-Fi, wired, DSL, that kind of thing.
And actually, before Nathan goes on, it was really what Bel Air Internet and Aspera did a few months ago at the, you knew I was going to say that, right? At the SIMTE conference, where they really did a great demo of what this is all about and where it's going. And I was sitting in the audience saying, I need to come up with a topic idea for this conference, and I think I just found it. So to Eric's left is Nathan. Nathan, if you would, please.
Hello, my name is Nathan Cartman. I work for Excelis. We are a federal contractor working federal contracts for Department of Defense, for FAA, for NASA, et cetera, et cetera. The group that I work with, I'm the chief engineer on our cloud infrastructure solutions, where we develop, deploy, and operate large-scale, wide area distributed infrastructures, primarily dealing with some of the Department of Defense's large format content that's generated, to be able to reduce latency to get from content generation to user access.
And to his left, Don Gabriel.
Yeah, I'm Don Gabriel. I guess you could call me a cosmic commercial real estate broker. I work for EchoStar Satellite Services. We are a satellite company within the EchoStar Technology Corporation, and we're tasked with selling capacity and leasing capacity on 3 commercial, what we call FSS satellites. And again, that sits within EchoStar Corporation, which many of you guys know as a video technology distribution, satellite distribution, set-top box design and manufacturing. But we're a kind of boutique operation inside all of that.
And the next 2 people stepped in at the last minute, so I thank them when one other person at a company that won't get mentioned, but they're also in Colorado, couldn't make it. Next is Ben from Akamai.
Yeah, so my name is Ben Bloom. I'm with Akamai. I manage our team of technical pre-sales consultants as well as professional services consultants that work with our media and gaming customers in the West Coast and most of the United States. We help our customers both take advantage of the cloud and help scale their businesses on the cloud. I've been at Akamai for over 5 years, and I've seen our traffic multiply many times in that time. But in parallel, not only is it about traffic growth, but it's about storage growth. And so we work with our customers managing library sizes anywhere from startups with a few pieces of content that they're really excited about to major studios with multiple petabytes of content. For a little bit of scale, we support customer events anywhere from on the smaller side of events of over a terabit per second, upwards of we've had single customer events over 10 terabits per second worldwide. Right now, I don't know if anyone's a soccer or football fan, but we're streaming the World Cup around the world. And so we see both sides, both the nascent kind of startup side of media businesses, as well as working with the studios to help reach their massive global audiences.
And Martin Rushworth from SoloVet.
Hi there, I'm Director of Technology at SoloVet. We run a worldwide high-speed, low-latency Ethernet IP network with over 400 media and entertainment companies connected. From like full range of production, post-production, visual effects, studios, broadcasters, advertising agencies. The majority of our content over the network is file-based media, moving around as part of a content creation workflow. The network was started by a group of visual effects companies in London to collaborate and share resources. We've got more involved over the years with extending collaboration into the cloud, people like Google, AWS, and software. We are a contributor to the OpenStack project. So we've got OpenStack Swift object store instances in London and Los Angeles.
Thank you, and I'm Marty Schifler. We have a husband and wife consulting practice with a Big Four professional service firm, top 5 business school background, and additional experience at Fox, MGM, Lucasfilms, Industrial Light Magic, Kodak, Cinesite, and Bank of America. We've worked at nearly every point on the value chain through the years and the many businesses that intersect with the points on that chain. And now we're going to talk about this by line of business. So let's get started with a topic related specifically to the creative industry. We have people here representing all segments on that value chain. So as you look at the various market segments, which from on-set storage and image capture to various aspects of editorial, visual effects, DI, distribution, and exhibition, really, where are the biggest challenges today? Which of those businesses represent those that are the biggest challenge? Go ahead, Michelle, you're smiling, you've got an answer, I'm sure.
There are so many answers to that question, but I'll throw out one because it is top of mind. Dovetailing with the Akamai comments, so the World Cup is on everybody's mind right now, and there is this transformation that's happened around delivery of the streaming content to the consumer in every format. The relevant point that I can bring to this is the way that's being done is quite revolutionary and exploiting the new storage infrastructure. And I'll elaborate in a moment on what that means because there are many technical hurdles. But the essential point is that some of the streaming distribution being run by EVS, who is FIFA's main vendor, is coming directly off the Amazon cloud out of an elemental transcoder. And the way that that takes place is there is real-time video capture in multiple camera angles around the matches, and those frames are uploaded in real time over the wide area. Our role, of course, as Aspera is to provide the upload capability to Aspera server software, which is running on the Amazon cloud. Now, the interesting bits of this are that this infrastructure approach is, first of all, it's never been done before. Second, it's incredibly low cost. And then the real-time, if you will, constraints on this are the type that you would expect in broadcast quality video, meaning that the video frames are timed to be about 3 frames ahead of transcoding. And we can't fall behind that in the upstream transfer. And then, of course, you've got all the wide area network conditions that were being discussed in the prior talk. The latency and packet loss varies. So each one of these camera streams needs to maintain a high and consistent throughput. And that's where our technology comes in. And I noticed there was a little reaction when I said it's very low cost. It's low cost by orders of magnitude, because of the fact the storage isn't purchased a priori, because of the fact there isn't a satellite involved, because of the fact that the transcoding is done on the fly in the cloud environment for just the formats that are needed. And then the main advantage of this, of course, is the consumption possibilities, right? You get high quality video in many forms, and of course it can be, it's live presented in this case, and it could also be transcoded into web consumable formats. This is EVS's CCAS system that I'm referring to. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is it touches on several parts of production. First of all, it is production because it's the actual video of the games. The match is taking place. And then secondly, it is the new way of distribution. And for me as a technologist, I mean, it has been one of the most amazing things I've seen in Aspera around broadcasting in 10 years, because it came together so quickly and has been really a confluence of several capabilities of technology. And for us, it's the first time to do an actual streaming case like this. And secondly, the real challenges are dealing with the reliability or unreliability of the cloud storage. Because of course, if you have to retry writes and stay ahead of the transcoder, you have to do that intelligently. So it's been, I think, a symbol of what's possible now, and a kind of a marker for how things are changing.
Ben is shaking his head. Did you get that right, Ben? And
Yeah,
you have
that's
something to add,
right.
given what you mentioned about the World Cup before. But also, I'm looking for commentary after that on other aspects of the creative pipeline and where the challenges are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's incredible about the workflow that Aspera has developed for the World Cup is that enables Akamai's customers to get quicker to market and be able to develop their applications around their audience and customize the experience without having to worry about the ingest and management of the content. And it really allows this, they've created this ecosystem that allows the distributors around the world to plug into it and easily reach the audience with this incredible broadcast quality digital workflow. And so we very much believe in Aspera and optimized transport, and have partnered with Aspera, not just around the World Cup, but to integrate Aspera into our platform, because we do think that optimized ingest and transport is a very important part of being able to get the content from wherever you're producing it to wherever your end users are.
So what about other aspects of the pipeline? Anybody else have a comment on that?
I think, well, we've solved like several issues with, for instance, like visual effects. So we just done a project with a visual effects house who use like on-demand render capacity. So we lit up like several thousand courses of Google Cloud. So I mean, kind of like the problems that they run into, for instance, were to get a VPN to extend their network to like the cloud. That would max out at 300 megabits a second. So we put in a solution for them. You do an equal cost multipath, so like doing several VPNs together, and kind of using protocols and technology to kind of solve like the bandwidth out to get the frames, get the bandwidth frames out, and reduce like the cloud. So that's like a good example of how companies are using the cloud to get what they need done. And I think if you could map that out into the future, it means that we have companies not spending too much capex on it. It encourages new business models like visual effects.
All right, let's go on to 4K and high dynamic range and high frame rate. You know, the jury's still out when and if 4K will come about, either for TV broadcasts or for movies. Notwithstanding the fact that a lot of theaters already have Sony 4K projectors or laser projectors in process, and a couple of other future-proofing type of concepts like that. What are the challenges not seeing now that 4K is going to bring? Or if after that, 8K or beyond?
Well, I can speak a little bit to this. I mean, I take a look at the traffic on our network at any given time, and kind of look at an aggregate of its destination. And we see right now on a nightly basis, and we're primarily a residential ISP, we see about 33% of our traffic on a nightly basis going to Netflix. So what you think about, okay, when the resolution gets even higher, what is that going to do to our traffic? I mean, I realize, companies like Aspera, other companies are creating better compression algorithms to get, more bits in, less packets. But, You see it in everything when we talk about storage and cloud, the big pipes. What kind of infrastructure are we going to need to support thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, or millions of people trying to stream high definition, super high definition, the 4K, the 8K video in the future?
Reed Hastings has been quoted about saying that for a 4K image from his system, 15 megabits should be sufficient. Is he right or is he wrong? Nathan just kind of winced when I said that. What do you think, Nathan?
Well, I was thinking not so much of the actual data rate, I was thinking so much of when we start talking about increasing resolution in video, it's analogous to, I think, every other domain where we continually improve the quality and the resolution of our content generation devices. And I was thinking that that puts a strain on the back-end infrastructure. You got to store that data somewhere. If you really want to hurt yourself, you can start storing it 2 times. If you really want to hurt yourself, you start storing it 3 times, 4 times, and 5 times. Because you're going to be buying a lot of storage. You're going to be paying a lot of maintenance on that storage. You're going to be paying a lot of IT guys to watch that storage. So being able to smartly reduce the amount of storage you're going to use the storage, being able to compress it better, yet still delivering quality of service and the frame rates and the bit rates you want to your consumers, all comes into play.
So is quality of service really the big challenge?
I think it is a big challenge. It's certainly going to be a big challenge because you're going to have more consumers going after the content. You're going to have higher bit rates required. At the same time, you want to reduce costs. You need to reduce the number of instances that you have the data on the infrastructure, so those storage rates that you have are going to be more stressed. So it all comes into play.
Go ahead, Don, I think you have
Yeah, in the satellite world, it's kind of funny because it presents both an opportunity and a challenge. In the satellite world, we play more in the distribution as opposed to the workflow, because just as you alluded to, Michelle, satellite time is expensive, and you can't do it. You were talking about doing the World Cup over satellite. It's not practical, it's expensive. But the challenge is for like a dish network or a DirecTV. If 4K broadcast starts taking off, well, they've got a limited amount of BSS space segment that they got to figure out, like, okay, how much do I choke it down to fit it on the satellite or on a transponder, or what network do I drop, or what service do I drop? So there's a bit of a challenge. May create a great business opportunity if the online services can't handle, at least in the beginning, 4K reliably. So there's the opportunity there. For those of us who are like in the satellite, in my end, and the FSS, the commercial side, where a lot of this is done, where satellites used for backhaul, or again, distribution to cable head ends, it's an opportunity to sell more satellite capacity to complement current HD or services that are distributed to cable head ends today. So it's both an opportunity and a challenge, but it's more about space as opposed to solving a complex.
So you used a good word, Don, capacity. And every year Cisco puts out its estimates for how the internet and IP traffic will grow. By 2018, Cisco says IP traffic globally will reach 1.6 zettabytes or 1.6 trillion gigabytes. As a result, the market for speedy connections is growing at a rapid rate. To me, that's kind of a supply and demand equation. There's strong demand and demand is growing. Is there sufficient supply? You're all looking quizzically. Supply and demand. Michelle, you've got something to say, I'm sure.
I do, but I was going to say something about the prior question in regard to the whole issue of 4K and a surprising problem. I'll come back to that later. So, I'm not in a position to predict. We don't supply bandwidth capacity, and obviously the trends are obvious in terms of the consumption patterns and what's happening with the over-the-top services. At the same time, I personally don't worry about it that much because I think in the supply and demand equation the market works. My interest is literally more in the technological barriers to do everything more efficiently. And I do think it's worth considering in this conversation, not just the front end of getting this massive content to the consumer, but in the back end as well. We serve Netflix, we are their transport to the Amazon cloud, and the 4K video to cloud storage environments has some very significant challenges that you wouldn't think of. And I think at some point it's worth talking about those, because the scalability of the object storage is not so obvious, and the chunk sizes you have to manage in memory are a half a gigabyte apiece. It makes the high-speed transport domain no longer so high-speed and reliable. And this is literally the kind of thing that we deal with when we're supporting the upload of the 4K video files to store and then turn around and distribute in these cases. So I didn't answer your question.
So yeah, is capacity growing fast enough is really the issue.
Well, I can talk about this a little bit as kind of a regional internet service provider. We've seen a tremendous jump in demand for bandwidth, and we've had to make upgrades on our infrastructure. We've had to think outside the box and invest in new technologies to deliver more bandwidth to more people in more places. The question to us is not, is it going to grow, or are we going to be able to support 4K video on our network? But how do we do it? Because people want what they want, right? They want the content that they want. They want to watch it when they want to watch it on demand. So unless you have a DVR, that kind of precludes a traditional paid cable service. So we're seeing more people watching more videos online. Well, we have to figure out, kind of like you're figuring out on the front end and the back end, we have to figure out, okay, on the back end, how do we get to this content faster? How do we peer with more people? I'm sure all of you have heard the buzzword of net neutrality in the last 6 months, and how Netflix and other content providers are having spats and feuds with internet service providers that you're slowing us down. No, you're slowing us down. And to the internet service provider's point, they have a point, right? They're saying, well, you the consumers are trying to push all this content, and you, the service provider, we're not getting a piece of that. So we want to charge you more to build out our infrastructure. I personally kind of look at it a little bit differently. I mean, we are a service provider. And I think service providers are going to continue to try and fight an uphill battle against consumers if they do not upgrade their capacities and upgrade their infrastructures, take advantage of new fiber technologies, moving from 10 gigabit waves to 100 gigabit waves, and faster last mile technologies to get consumers more bandwidth, because the consumers want what they want.
Nathan, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking there's a social aspect to this as well. We look 5 years ago, and I look at what I used to pay for my cell phone bills and my TV bills and my internet bills compared to what I pay today. Back then I was saying, I'm going to go hide in the cave. And I also look at the content that my kids view, and I'm not going to say whether it's information or data. I think if you're watching YouTube on how to take a Doritos bag and make a bowl out of it, okay, great. But she wants to watch it, right? And the way in which, I guess how I say, the threshold of paying for it is increasing. So I think there will be investment. I think that investment will be passed off to us, the consumers, and I think we're going to slowly be brainwashed that we got to have it. We're not going to think twice about it.
Yeah, the consumers are demanding it. Their expectations are increasing about what they expect out of that pipeline that they're buying from their provider, and their demands on the content are increasing too. They're expecting, even if they don't have 4K screen, they're expecting high quality experience. And so their expectations are increasing, same, kind of across the board. And that's another challenge in addition to wanting to play catch up in 2 years.
And 4K isn't going to explode tomorrow. There's going to be, it's not like HD, when HD kicked in, it happened pretty quickly. But 4K is something that the consumer, there's, back in the early days of DirecTV and Dish, when they were first showing their digital, because it was digital back then, signal in Circuit City compared to local cable, the consumer would look at that and say, wow, that digital feed from Dish or DirecTV is really better. Then they go home, they turn on their TV at home and say, well, wait a minute, this is pretty good. You forget what the difference is. Well, that was not the case with HD. Even my parents, when they first saw HD, it was like, we gotta have HD. 4K is an incremental difference. If you have a 60-inch TV and you're far enough away, you're gonna see a difference, right? But beyond that, you're gonna be fine. So you may get blown away in Best Buy, but you're not gonna get, when you get home, you're gonna turn on your Sony TV, your 50-inch TV, and say, well, this looks pretty damn good, and not think about it. for a long time, you know? So since the question is directly about 4K, because that will drive a lot of bandwidth requirements, I think there's going to be time to sort it out.
But you know, in the early days of HD, people bought that first HD TV and they spent $2,500. I know I spent about $3,200 or $3,300 for my first HD TV. And that was a problem that Best Buy had and other companies had in trying to sell Blu-ray. Because people spent $3,000, let's say, for that TV, brought it home and it looked really good. And they sometimes forgot that they needed to buy HD service. And they plugged in, but it still looked pretty good because it was better than the CRT they had. And then they plugged in their SD DVD player, I have to get those letters out correctly, SD DVD player, and that looked pretty darn good. So they weren't about to spend $300 or $400 or $500 for that Blu-ray player. So I mean, do you think that next generation player is going to work with a 4K TV? Are we going to have that same problem as the old infrastructure, or is it all going to be streaming at that point in time?
Well, you can stream 4K content now. I can't refer to it, but we just very recently did a live broadcast online of 4K content. I mean, multi-bit rate, but all the way up to 4K. I don't know that people are actually watching it yet, but the content's going to be much more accessible, and the barrier to entry is a lot lower now that so much content is online and people are consuming it online. I think there's always going to be a place for physical media, but I think that the early adopters are always looking online now, and that content is starting to be available. So, although it's true that it's more of an incremental upgrade, and there's less extra value they get out of moving to 4K, I think the technology is going to capture the minds of the early adopters and already has started to.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick. I think that you used a key word there, availability, right? And technology obsolescence, that people, when somebody is looking to purchase a TV, I don't want to buy something that's going to be outdated in 6 months. If I'm buying a new router, I'm not buying an 11N router, I'm buying an 11AC router because that's the newest and latest and greatest thing. And if you have that available, and if you have, let's say, a set-top box that's able to stream 4K, you're not really going to have a choice, right? It's just going to pick the best resolution that it can to display on the system that you have. We've seen in our statistics with traffic on our network that goes to YouTube, over 96% of the streams in the last month were high definition streams. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens when the availability of 4K online content increases as people continue to just buy current televisions and set-top boxes that support that.
But the problem is right now in the United States, somewhere in excess of 75% of US TV households have a flat screen HD TV, and better than 50% of those households have 2 or more. So it's going to be a trick figuring out what that replacement cycle is going to be and what people will buy and at what expense will they pay for it. We've just come through the Great Recession. Anyway, that was more a statement than a question. Let's talk about I happen to have an opinion on some of the topics, as you might have seen. Let's talk about the long tail for a moment, because that's really important when we look at content. You know, with the long tail, that book came out several years ago. It was really that the long tail would be out there because you can't afford to have traditional shelf space, but it's not a problem with digital copies. Right? Has that played out? How has that played out to the positive? How has that played out to the negative? Are we truly experiencing, there we go, a long tail?
Yeah, I think absolutely that's been enabled by the technology and the massive availability of online storage and the ability to reach global audiences online. I think that long tail is absolutely coming to fruition. It's hard to monetize it, but I think the technology is definitely there already. And if you look at the availability of the major video providers out there, they're competing on their libraries. Everyone has the hot content, but it's the long tail, the niche markets, where all the growth is coming from.
And just picking up on that, I mean, the new technology brings the economics in everyone's favor, because now you can achieve low-cost storage and low-cost distribution, and even around the traditional, perhaps CDN approach, one can distribute directly the long tail content for very low cost if you have distance neutral transfer capability. And this is something that's been brought to us by some of our studio customers as a new way of distributing their long tail content libraries, is let's keep this very low cost proportional to what the consumption patterns are, which is, why can't we store these movies in a low-cost cloud storage environment and serve them with Aspera transfers, because of the fact that you could achieve a good quality of experience to the consumer and then make the cost point appropriate for the content's value. And I definitely think that's going to be a wave of distribution for the long tail content going into the future. And again, it's a new concept that's come of age just because of the confluence of bandwidth, transport technology for high-speed performant delivery and cloud storage.
Yeah, and the long tail kind of took a little time to kind of come about because there was all that talk about long tail, and then, you know, a cable operator or, you know, would still look at, you know, 80%, the old 80-20, you know, 80% of their content was being consumed, was 20% most recent films or shows or whatever, further on demand. But this concept of, you know, depends on how long tail is. This concept of binge viewing is really what's driving, I think, will change the long tail equation. Because I don't know how many people have started watching like either Mad Men or even Game of Thrones years after it came out, because they finally just want to see what all this was about.
I just started watching The West Wing.
Oh no! Yeah. So I think I'm curious to see how that long tail, short tail equation starts to change if people are going back and watching this.
I mean, it really comes down to the question is, what has it done, what will it do to storage, or what has it done or might it do with just content transport? Or is it really negligible in the aggregate?
I think before the panel we were joking that bits were bits right now. We all store and manage them kind of the same way, whether it's the most popular, hottest movie that just released, or it's, you know, those early episodes of West Wing that only Eric's watching. I think what's going to happen in the future storage is that the types of storage are going to get split, and there's going to be some predictive way of putting the hot content on hot storage designed for hot content and high performing. And then there'll be some cold storage shed where all those old episodes of TV shows and the cooler content is going to sit out there. It all has to be readily available and accessible and high performing. But I think there is going to be some split in the way that content is treated depending on how popular it is.
So you're talking like TV land?
Exactly.
And with all respect to Akamai, who's a great Aspera partner, I think the network distribution economics change equally. That the long tail content does not merit the highest premium service through the Akamai CDN, and moreover, what's the value of caching it everywhere because only a few people are going to watch it. And that was my point about downloading it from a few places with high-speed transport that's very low cost. So same kind of argument with the tiering of the storage.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I want to take the basic topic title and break that down into its various components. I talked about wired, wireless, satellite. Let's chat about satellite for a moment, because we're really looking to the future. Not necessarily that is the future, but with some of the things that are going on, it might very well be. So EchoStar is certainly satellite-based, but Google has been talking satellite really even before it announced its recent acquisition of Skybox Imaging. But they've also been talking about hot air balloons. You try to get those words out. Hot air balloons, and Titan Aerospace, their high altitude drone concepts. So there's this stuff up there in the cloud, in the real clouds. And this past weekend, SpaceX was scheduled to launch, and I don't think they did, 6 satellites for Orbcon, with the announcement that the satellites will provide scientists with a faster and more robust way to transmit data and send messages. So are we looking at that as being something that if Google says we're going to do it, then it kind of supports what EchoStar has been doing, and that perhaps satellite and drone and hot air balloons may really be an answer, or is it really just an answer for underdeveloped countries and urban areas?
Underdeveloped, underserved areas. I think that's what Google, Facebook are looking at, using those capabilities for around the world. Because again, there's limited amount of bandwidth. I will admit that, over the satellite, direct to home, high throughput satellite, whatever you want to call it, service, is not going to be robust enough to support all this cool stuff we're talking about. It doesn't scale up. These exist to reach areas that are just, it's not economically sound to put a terrestrial broadband service out to a home, or to areas that are just so unserved and never will be served. I think they're gap fillers.
Or used for temporary circumstances.
Temporary circumstances.
Okay.
I think really when you break down satellite, they're talking about drone, hot air balloon, you're talking about wireless technologies. And we've seen a significant increase in the amount of throughput, lower latency in different types of wireless technologies that are available. There's chipsets that are coming to market right now, and they're just components, but these chipsets are capable on like a point-to-point microwave link of being able to transmit upwards of 10 gigabits per second, which is a huge quantum leap in the amount of efficiency. I use the term spectral efficiency, being able to have X amount of spectrum and be able to transmit more bits per hertz in that spectrum. So although I think, my kind of initial reaction to those types of things is they're like pie in the sky, and in some cases literally. There is something to be said about the merits of being able to set up infrastructure in that way, especially when we're talking about underserved areas and areas that don't have the fiber capacity, don't have the bandwidth that we would have in like a big metro like Los Angeles, Dallas, New York, that kind of thing.
But you talk wireless, you're talking microwave in part because that's what your company does, but if the Sprint T-Mobile deal goes through to the tune of $40 billion, that's what it'd be. Masayoshi Son wants to do that, wants to get more spectrum and be able to deliver, broadband to the home. I mean, I pull out my phone, and if I run speed test on it, depending where, when, why, and how, I get 30 or 40 down. I can get 8 to 10 up. I only get 22 down on my Time Warner cable right now. This is household stuff. So is he talking pie in the sky if that T-Mobile Sprint deal goes through? Is it viable, or what are the pros and cons?
So I think that there's a very interesting article in the ACN this month about the new spectrum, and the real point of this article is that with software programmable approaches to wireless technology and the chipsets, that the ability to harness and use spectrum at will in these devices is manifold, what it used to be. And the point of that is that, and Craig Partridge is the gentleman that wrote this, is very well known in internet and networking technology, but the real, I think, essence of that in response to this is our ability to harness that spectrum technologically is there. The real issue becomes how is it that we take advantage of that in services that are offered to people, and also to a certain degree in the regulatory side, which is way behind what the technology can currently do.
What about so-called super Wi-Fi, the 802.11ax? If there's, anybody got any comment on that? Is that going to supplant wireless or cellular?
I think as wireless technology evolves, you get more overhead, right? In 11N, they started talking about 300 megabits per second, 600, 900 AC. We're pushing the gigabit barrier, and moving on to other new standards, we get more and more overhead. There is a little bit of a supply and demand question, because right now most households are on some type of wireline service, and that doesn't eat up any spectrum. Marty, when we started talking about, okay, can we use an LTE or some kind of wireless-based service to start serving all households? you start talking about a lot of bandwidth. There's a lot of usage, and okay, maybe somebody's streaming HD that's 7 megabits per second. Well, you multiply that by tens of thousands of people, you start talking about a lot of spectrum and eating up that overhead pretty quickly. So I think it's just a question of how quickly is the technology going to evolve? Because our bandwidth needs are evolving significantly compared to where they were 5-10 years ago, and what are they going to be 5-10 years from now?
And it may come to pay for your privilege to use it, just like toll roads are going now.
Right.
Anybody else? I'll move on. All right, mergers and acquisitions. So I mentioned Sprint and T-Mobile before, Comcast and Time Warner, AT&T and DirecTV. How are those potential mergers, and the chances are fairly high that they're all going to go through, assuming the money's there on the Sprint T-Mobile deal. How are they going to impact our trekking to the cloud? If at all.
I think that every market is different for connectivity and content. I think one of lots of markets in the US suffer from a lack of competition. So I think that this is what Google's trying to do by rolling out fiber, is it's trying to shake up the markets a bit. I think that we've seen a lot of this happening in business, where cities and kind of small boutique fiber operators are running fiber around to try and shake up the market. And I think that with all these mergers and acquisitions, I think that the consumer market will impact a lot as well.
I actually think that maybe a little theologically that these are very healthy movements, because they're helping to shore up Comcast and AT&T, etc., against what is just an overwhelming shift in favor of the over-the-top internet infrastructure companies, Google, Amazon, and then Netflix, frankly, and their ability to harness that model. And I think without these kinds of, if you will, business consolidations that are bringing together the delivery, the consumer, and the content, that our world is going to shift in the favor of those companies so much that those suppliers, may not really be competitive going into the future. And I think that's what this is all about. I mean, whether this hegemony that's getting created is really good, I don't know, but I think right now this has to take place, or the entirety of consumption is going to be controlled by Google, Amazon, and Netflix. Apple.
Would it get to the place that the Googles and the Amazons will be providing internet service to residential?
Google already is, right?
Yeah.
But Google Fiber, if you're talking that for a moment, instead of the hot air balloons, they're only in 3 cities right now.
Right.
Well, and they seem to have stopped, although no one really knows, because they don't tell anybody until they have to tell somebody.
Well, let's look at that model, the fiber to the home model here for a second, because gigabit to the home, and I've seen a lot of buzz about that in the industry. In Provo, Utah, where Google deployed their fiber network, they bought a municipal laid fiber network that went bankrupt, sold to another company, and then Google took it over and bought it for a penny, right? So our Fios, the rollout is completely stopped. I haven't seen any new Fios roll out for a long time, because I don't think right now, with the current market conditions, those types of things are profitable. Just to kind of circle back to the topic that we were talking about, the merger between Comcast and Time Warner, I do believe that coax networks actually kind of hold a huge key to data delivery in the future. DOCSIS 3 has already, which is the current DOCSIS standard, has already broken the 100 megabit per second barrier. DOCSIS 3.1 promises to deliver gig and multi-gig service over a coaxial cable. Then you look at very well built out networks like Comcast and Time Warner. They have huge amounts of fiber in them, so they're able to inject multi-gig fiber into more and more places. Albeit they're not greatly operated networks. You look at the customer service and satisfaction of Time Warner and Comcast, they're awful. But I mean, I think it's a little bit, I'm a little concerned of the consolidation of data delivery and then, you know, content providers kind of coupled with the whole stuff that's going on right now with net neutrality and the government kind of backing down and saying, hey, you know, you can create the fast lanes, you can fast track certain content and not others. To me, it could mean, it could be good news for the consumer, but it could also, on the flip side of that, be very bad news.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think, you know, if I take where I live, I have the opportunity to get Time Warner Cable or AT&T, and I just don't see either of them pulling fibre optic into my home because I'm still going to be paying them tens of dollars, which is what I'm paying them now. So I don't see like a business reason for them to do that. But on the flip side of that, how hard can it be? It's just use the copper pair as a or the coaxial as a drawbar.
I think that the main point is that just as Eric pointed out, that the investing is not directly profitable, and how are the web companies doing it? Well, Google's using all their profits from their web business in order to subsidize doing this. And the point is that this consolidation of internet business, right, and in turning that into funding internet infrastructure is making these megapolises out of Amazon and Google very rapidly, right? And this is what I was talking about, that, you know, for balance and competition and favor to the consumer, we need some diversity. And I really think the response of the more traditional cable companies to buy each other up and consolidate is an attempt to survive this.
Any other mergers or acquisitions that anybody wants to speculate on that we haven't mentioned that could be out there that would impact what we're talking about, either in a positive or a negative way?
Well, it'd be interesting to see what happens with what my boss does with all his spectrum, what Charlie Ergen does. He's got a lot of the spectrum, and he bought it up just because he knew what was going to happen. Now, how he ends up leveraging it, I could get in big trouble if I would even speculate, because he doesn't call me that much anymore. But that's the other wild card right now. It's like, what happens with all that spectrum? My guess is he's not looking to sell the spectrum and make a big profit on the spectrum, make billions. He still wants to be in business, so whether it's a relationship with Verizon or something like that, who knows?
And he's been the most vocal, even more so than Masayoshi-san, about using spectrum. And actually, he's also been fairly innovative in this new OTT streaming concept that's coming down, especially when 5% of US households today have a complete cut from the cord.
Yeah, people always think of Charlie Ergen as a satellite guy, and he's not sentimental at all about satellites. He just wants to deliver content, whatever way is the most efficient, profitable way to do it. Currently, it's satellites for his business, but man, he'll jump into over the top in a New York minute if that's the best way to. He's going to protect it.
And I think that's a big advantage and difference with the internet versus previous kind of technological cycles. You'll get Big Bell and the breakup of Big Bell where they own everything and it's a real monopoly. The internet by its nature is heterogeneous. It's a mixed network. As much as there's big investments in very visible places, there's always an opportunity for someone else to develop a new service that plugs into it. Maybe it's someone figures out a way to connect all the mobile devices. Like there's a big effort in Europe to use untapped mobile CPUs to do supercomputer processing. Could we do the same thing with, everyone's phone has a Wi-Fi node in it. Why can't that be a new neural network? I think that there are going to be opportunities because of the heterogeneous nature of the internet for those new ways to connect to consumers. I think what's really interesting is what's happening in developing areas like Africa, where people are skipping over hardwired connections. And it's necessarily mobile because of the geography, but also because they're finding that's a quicker path to getting online.
Well, that's the argument for using spectrum.
Right, exactly.
Forget the legacy systems. You didn't have to go to hardwired in lots of countries where, they just never had a real telephone or running water or various things. One more comment, then we'll get to some questions from the audience. can't talk about this without talking about Aereo. And Aereo, I thought really today that the Supreme Court might have, if we were all lucky, might have had a decision today. Well, it's probably going to be tomorrow, maybe it's going to be Thursday. So I want to do a quick poll. I don't want to ask your personal opinion, although you can give it. How many people think that the Supreme Court will vote in favor? And then I'm going to ask in a second how many people think the Supreme Court is going to say no. This has nothing to do with your personal opinion. It's kind of like, who's going to win the Academy Award for Best Movie? It doesn't have to be your favorite movie, it's what you think the Academy is going to vote on. How many people in this room think that the Supreme Court will vote in favor of Aereo? Okay, that means everybody else against? Against? And I think the majority of the room didn't raise their hand whatsoever. Okay. So let's assume that it does happen and they vote in favor of it. There's some 225 million DVRs in the country now in the US. And let's say a portion of those move over to Aereo and they get other content in other ways. What does that do for the infrastructure? That could be the same thing as 30 to 40% of the traffic being on Netflix today, maybe 30 to 40% being on Aereo a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now? Or anything else you want to interject?
I'll throw something out. I think it's different, and maybe it's just a matter of perception. I think people look at the abstraction of content delivery different from the means, the highway. In this country, for better or for worse, we've tended to look at the highway as regulatable, right? And I think Aereo's situation feels like the highway, whereas Netflix situation feels like, well, this is just an application of content and therefore ought to be able to do whatever it wants. And maybe, I mean, this might be a stretch to say, but maybe that ties into just our cultural traditions around speech, right? We believe that speech is free and it should go as it will, as opposed to infrastructure. So that's my personal thought.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Anybody else? Or should we go to questions?
Yeah, no, I think
Ben, go ahead, and then we'll go to questions.
I'm hoping, or I think if Aereo does get approval and it's continuing to operate, I think it's just going to drive and accelerate the move from linear programming to be strictly over traditional channels to online. I think linear broadcasting is very much over satellite and traditional antenna broadcast. I think companies like Aereo are going to essentially force the hand of media companies to move that linear programming online. And I think consumers are going to start demanding it. And I'm hopeful that the providers and the operators are going to realize that eyeballs are eyeballs. I don't care if I get you over an antenna or over an IP channel, as long as I'm capturing your attention and getting that ad impression. That's what's important to my business. So I think it's going to motivate that or accelerate that move for linear programming to come online.
All right, let's go with some questions from the audience. Mr. Slutsky?
Must carry. The whole idea that we built a system on must carry, and I think it's one of the lodestones around their neck. They don't want to let go of it because they're addicted to it. But the truth is, we don't watch those programs. So coming back to long-tail, the must carry role is going to come up against exactly what you're talking about, which is the crossover to a online service. I mean, I think it's happened sooner than later, because must carries went way over, further than they ever thought I could take it down, but it's still there.
Anybody want to comment on must carry?
Is must carry as much of an issue anymore, though? Because with the consolidation of the media business, in the NFL, it's like a cable operator, an MSO, a cable system, needs each one of the network broadcasts. And so very rarely can a network affiliate say, they can opt out of must carry and say, all right, I'm going to opt out of must carry in my local market. Not only that, but you're going to pay me however many dollars or so because you need me. And oh, by the way, not only are you going to have to pay me so many dollars or so, but you have to take ESPN, Disney Channel, and all that. And that's what.
That very concept.
Yeah.
How many people really want ESPN?
And that's, you know, and that's why the broadcasters and the networks hate aerial, because it takes that ability to bundle. That's the real issue, the bundling off the table. And, you know, we'll see, it's hard to sell.